Birmingham, Alabama had lived with violence before. It was a city familiar with crime statistics, police sirens, and the quiet grief that followed nightly news reports. But what unfolded between the summer of 2023 and the fall of 2024 was something far more disturbing. This was not chaos. It was not random. It was a sustained wave of bloodshed that crept across neighborhoods, workplaces, parking lots, and crowded nightlife districts, leaving behind bodies, unanswered questions, and a city struggling to understand how it all connected. For months, investigators worked each crime as a separate tragedy. Different locations, different victims, different circumstances. But behind the scenes, patterns were forming. Ballistics began to overlap. Witness descriptions echoed one another. Surveillance footage revealed similar movements, similar vehicles, similar shadows slipping away after gunfire. And slowly, a single name began to surface again and again. Damian McDaniel. He was just 23 years old when authorities say the killing spree began. To people who knew him casually, he appeared unremarkable, another young man trying to survive in Birmingham. No public persona of a monster, no warning label. But prosecutors would later argue that beneath that ordinary exterior was someone methodically orchestrating violence on a scale rarely seen in modern Alabama history. The timeline once assembled painted a chilling picture of escalation. It began on the morning of the 12th of July, 2023, at Birmingham Fire Station 9. The day had barely started. It was 8:30 a.m., just 30 minutes after shift change. 3 firefighters were settling into their routine, checking equipment, talking quietly, preparing for a 24-hour rotation. The bay doors were open, the station doors were unlocked. Nothing seemed unusual. Then the gunshots came. Jordan Melton and Jamal Jones were struck where they stood. Both were in uniform. Both were unarmed. Melton would fight for his life for 5 days before dying in the hospital. Jones survived, but only barely. The shooter vanished. Security cameras existed, but the attack had been executed with caution. No suspect was immediately identified. The case stalled, leaving firefighters across the city shaken and angry, wondering who could ambush first responders in broad daylight. But the violence didn't stop. On the 27th of November, 2023, 2-year-old Reginald Bryant was found behind a home on Closure Lane. He had been shot and left to die. Witnesses reported seeing multiple individuals approach him shortly before gunfire erupted. Investigators initially believed it was a robbery gone wrong. Another tragic but isolated incident, or so it seemed. Then 2024 arrived, and the pace accelerated. On January 10, Mia Nixon, just 21 years old, was discovered dead in her own driveway on Greencrest Turn. It was after 2 a.m. There were no signs of random violence. Authorities later concluded she had been targeted, though the motive remained unclear. 1 month later, on Valentine's Day, Christian Norris and Angelia Webster, both only 20 years old, left a home in the Ensley area to go see a movie. They never arrived. 2 days later, their bodies were found inside their car in the WM neighborhood. Angelia was 5 months pregnant. The brutality of the scene sent shockwaves through Birmingham. It was no longer possible to dismiss these deaths as unrelated. By April 9, the killings reached a disturbing level of precision. Anthony Love Jr. finished his shift at a UPS facility on Englewood Lane. He walked toward his car, unaware he was being watched. Surveillance cameras later captured movement shadows crossing the frame. Prosecutors would describe his death as a murder for hire, an execution carried out in plain sight. Whoever pulled the trigger knew exactly what they were doing. And then came the 13th of July, 2024. That night, Trendsetters Lounge on 27th Street North was packed with people celebrating a birthday. Music played, drinks were poured, laughter filled the room. Then gunfire erupted from outside, tearing through the building. 4 people were killed. 10 others were wounded. Lorandis Anderson, Stevie McGee, Maresha Gettings, and Angela Weatherspoon never made it home. Witnesses described chaos, screaming bodies collapsing, blood pooling on the floor. It was one of the deadliest mass shootings Birmingham had ever experienced. Investigators later discovered the venue was unlicensed and lacked proper security measures. But those details offered little comfort to families burying their loved ones. The summer continued in blood. August 13, another victim. September 19, another shooting at a bar and lounge. And then the 21st of September, 2024. 5 Points South, the Hush Lounge, one of Birmingham's busiest entertainment districts. Just before 9 p.m., gunfire exploded into the crowd. 4 more people were killed. 17 others were injured. Antitra Holloman, Taj Booker, Carlos McCain, Roderick Patterson Jr., one of the deadliest mass shootings in modern Alabama history. By now, police were no longer treating these cases as separate. Behind closed doors, a task force had been quietly building a case spanning 18 incidents over just more than a year. Ballistics linked weapons across scenes. Witness statements overlapped. Vehicles appeared again and again on surveillance footage. And one name kept resurfacing. Damian McDaniel. When authorities finally went public, the scope of the allegations stunned the city. 18 lives, not 18 incidents, 18 people allegedly tied to McDaniel's actions. In February 2025, police announced he had been charged with capital murder in the death of firefighter Jordan Melton. That charge cracked the case open. More charges followed. By May, prosecutors accused McDaniel and alleged accomplices of responsibility for all 18 deaths, including 2 mass shootings, the firefighter ambush, the Valentine's Day murders, and the alleged murder for hire. Officials revealed that McDaniel and his network were allegedly responsible for nearly 30% of all murders in Birmingham during a 3-month period in 2024 alone. McDaniel denied everything. From jail, he posted on social media claiming he was being framed. He accused investigators of manipulating evidence, insisted he was a scapegoat for unsolved crimes. He pointed to his probation history, emphasizing that he had checked in monthly until his arrest. Prosecutors weren't convinced. They described overwhelming evidence, cooperating witnesses, digital communication suggesting coordination, surveillance footage, and statements from co-defendants implicating him in multiple killings. In 2025, a judge set McDaniel's first trial date for the 6th of April, 2026, beginning with the Trendsetters Lounge mass shooting. His attorneys immediately raised concerns about finding an impartial jury in a city traumatized by violence. Birmingham had recorded 151 murders in 2024. McDaniel's name had become synonymous with that bloodshed. Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty. If convicted, Damian McDaniel could face execution or life without parole. 18 families wait for answers. A city waits for closure. And a young man sits in a maximum security facility accused of orchestrating one of the most devastating crime sprees Alabama has ever seen. But Birmingham's darkness didn't end with one man. In a quiet town north of Huntsville, another case was about to reveal a different kind of horror, one that would force a community to confront the unthinkable. Elkmont, Alabama is the kind of place people move to escape fear. A town of barely 500 residents where neighbors recognize each other's cars, where doors are left unlocked, and where violent crime feels like something that happens somewhere else. For decades, nothing had ever challenged that sense of safety. Until the night of the 2nd of September, 2019. That evening, the house on Ridge Road was quiet. John Wayne Sisk, 38, and his wife Mary, 35, had put their children to bed. Kane, just 6 years old, Aurora, 4, and Colson, a 6-month-old baby sleeping in his crib. Their teenage son, Mason Sisk, was home as well. 14 years old, quiet, reserved, a boy who blended into the background. Nothing about that night seemed out of the ordinary. But by morning, every person in that house except Mason would be dead. Sometime after 10 p.m., Mason was seen running from the home. He flagged down a nearby resident, frantic and shaking, claiming something terrible had happened. When law enforcement arrived, they entered a scene that would leave seasoned investigators speechless. John and Mary Sisk were found in their beds. So were Kane and Aurora. In another room, baby Colson had been shot as he slept in his crib. Every victim had been killed with a to the head. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of a struggle. No robbery. It was execution. At first, Mason was treated as a surviving victim. He told deputies he had been in the basement playing video games when he heard gunshots. He claimed he ran upstairs and saw a vehicle speeding away from the property. He described the car, its color, its size, the direction it fled. But the story didn't hold. Investigators quickly noticed inconsistencies. The timeline didn't match forensic evidence. No footprints, no tire tracks, no indication anyone else had been in the house. The doors were locked, windows intact, and Mason's description of the vehicle couldn't be corroborated by any witnesses or cameras. As deputies pressed for details, Mason remained calm. Too calm. His emotional response didn't align with the horror around him. When questioned further at the Limestone County Sheriff's Office, his story began to shift. Then, during a recorded interview that would later be played in court, Mason admitted the truth. He had done it. His explanation was disturbingly simple. He said his parents argued constantly. He said he was tired of the fighting. He said the younger children were going through a lot. No rage, no panic, just resignation. At 14 years old, Mason Sisk had shot and killed his entire family. Court records later revealed troubling warning signs that, in hindsight, felt impossible to ignore. Mason had allegedly attempted to poison his stepmother by giving her peanut butter despite knowing she had a severe allergy. He had stolen rings from her. He had taken a firearm from his grandmother's house. Family members reported escalating behavioral issues and aggression toward his younger siblings. But no one imagined this. Under Alabama law, juveniles charged with capital murder are automatically tried as adults. However, because Mason was a minor, he was ineligible for the death penalty. The question wasn't whether he would be punished, it was how severely. Prosecutors charged Mason with multiple counts of capital murder. His defense team argued he was a traumatized child, that his confession had been coerced, and that he lacked the psychological maturity to fully understand his actions. They pushed for treatment instead of life imprisonment. The first trial began in September 2022. It ended in a mistrial. New evidence had emerged, data recovered from Mary Sisk's cell phone, forcing the court to halt proceedings. The delay meant Mason would turn 18 before facing trial again. No longer a child in the eyes of the law, but still being judged for crimes committed as one. In April 2023, the second trial began. Jurors heard everything. They watched the interrogation video. They listened as investigators described the crime scene. They learned about the earlier poisoning attempt, the stolen jewelry, the firearm. They heard testimony describing how Mason had moved from room to room, shooting each family member as they slept. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts of capital murder. Mason showed no visible reaction as the verdict was read. Now, the responsibility fell to Circuit Judge Chadwick Wise, U.S. Supreme Court rulings required judges to consider a juvenile's capacity for change before imposing life without parole. Such sentences are meant to be reserved for the rarest of cases. Judge Wise reviewed the evidence and concluded this was one of them. In his sentencing order, he described the crime as ghastly, disturbing, and draped in unmitigated evil. He emphasized that all 5 victims were executed in their beds, that 3 were small children, that one was an infant. On the 7th of September 2023, Mason Sisk was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His defense immediately appealed, arguing the sentence was unconstitutional and the trial flawed. In December 2023, a judge denied their motion for a new trial. In 2024, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals upheld both the conviction and the sentence. Mason Sisk will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Elkmont never recovered. Vigils were held, memorials were built, but the questions remain questions with no satisfying answers. How does a 14-year-old commit something so calculated? What signs were missed? Could anything have stopped it? 5 lives were erased in one night by someone who was supposed to be part of their circle of love and trust. And as Alabama would learn again and again, sometimes the most horrifying violence doesn't come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from inside the home. Pelham, Alabama sits just south of Birmingham, a quiet suburban city where most people expect their biggest daily concern to be traffic on Highway 31. On the morning of the 5th of August, 1999, that sense of normalcy shattered in less than an hour. Alan Eugene Miller was 34 years old, a delivery driver for Ferguson Enterprises, a heating and air conditioning supply company. To coworkers, he was quiet, reserved, and easily irritated. But inside Miller's mind, something darker had been growing for months, a belief that the people around him were conspiring against him. Rumors, he claimed. Whispers at work, people talking behind his back. There was no evidence those rumors existed, but to Miller, they were real enough to justify what came next. That Thursday morning, Johnny Cobb, the company's vice president, arrived at the building as usual. As he approached the entrance, he heard shouting. Before he could understand what was happening, Miller appeared in front of him holding a .40 caliber Glock handgun. "I'm tired of people starting rumors about me," Miller said calmly. Then he walked away. Inside the building, Cobb discovered the aftermath. Christopher Scott Yancey, 28 years old, was under a desk. He had been shot 3 times. One bullet tore through his groin and severed his spinal cord, instantly paralyzing him. Unable to move, he had been executed where he lay. Down the hallway, Lee Holdbrooks, 32, had been shot in the chest and head. Somehow he remained conscious. He crawled nearly 25 feet toward an exit, leaving a trail of blood behind him. Miller had waited, watched, then stepped forward and fired a final shot into Holbrook's head. 9 shell casings littered the floor. 2 men were dead, but Miller wasn't finished. He left the scene, climbed into his delivery truck, and drove 5 miles to Post Air Gas, another business where he had once worked. There he found Terry Jarvis, 39, a former supervisor. Jarvis had no time to run. Miller shot him 5 times. 3 men were murdered in less than an hour. Alabama Highway Patrol soon located Miller's truck, pulled over on the side of the road. When officers approached, Miller surrendered without resistance. Inside the vehicle, they found the gun. When questioned, he offered no explanation beyond what he had already said. The rumors. At trial, prosecutors painted a clear picture. This was not a crime of passion. Miller had armed himself, moved methodically between locations, and executed his victims with precision. Each had been shot multiple times. The defense attempted an insanity plea. A psychiatrist testified that Miller suffered from severe paranoia. But under Alabama law, mental illness alone is not enough. The expert admitted Miller still understood right from wrong. Miller withdrew his insanity plea. In 2000, a jury convicted him of capital murder. He was sentenced to death and sent to Holman Correctional Facility. There, his case entered a legal limbo that would last more than 2 decades. Alabama struggled to carry out executions by lethal injection. Drug manufacturers refused to supply the chemicals. Execution dates were scheduled, postponed, then canceled. On the 22nd of September 2022, Miller was strapped to a gurney for lethal injection. But prison staff couldn't find a vein. Miller weighed over 350 pounds. Attempts to establish IV access failed again and again. As midnight approached the legal cutoff, the execution was called off. Miller was returned to his cell. He sued the state, arguing another attempt would amount to cruel and unusual punishment. Alabama settled. The state agreed it would never again attempt lethal injection on Miller. Instead, it would use nitrogen hypoxia, an untested method that deprives the body of oxygen by forcing the inmate to breathe pure nitrogen gas. Supporters claimed it would be painless. Critics called it experimental. In January 2024, Alabama used nitrogen hypoxia for the first time on another inmate. Witnesses described violent shaking, gasping, and prolonged suffering. International outrage followed. Still, the state moved forward. On the 26th of September 2024, Alan Eugene Miller became the second person in the world executed by nitrogen gas. A mask was placed over his face. At 6:14 p.m., the nitrogen began flowing. Miller's final words were defiant. "I didn't do anything to be in here," he said. Witnesses reported that Miller shook violently for several minutes. His body strained against the restraints. Then came gasping, shallow, desperate breaths that continued for several minutes more. At 6:38 p.m., he was pronounced dead. The process lasted approximately 16 minutes. State officials said everything went according to plan. Critics disagreed, calling the execution inhumane. For the families of Christopher Yancey, Lee Holbrooks, and Terry Jarvis, it brought a form of closure 25 years after their loved ones were murdered because of delusions that existed only in one man's mind. Alan Eugene Miller died maintaining his innocence. 3 lives had already been lost, and Alabama's justice system was forever changed by the method used to end his. But if this case raised questions about punishment and mental illness, the next case would challenge something even more fundamental. What happens when the law fails someone who insists they were only trying to survive? Stevenson, Alabama sits near the Tennessee border, a small town where people know each other's histories sometimes too well. By January 2018, Brittany Smith was trying to rewrite hers. She was 32 years old, a mother of 4, recently sober after struggling with methamphetamine addiction. She was rebuilding her life slowly, carefully trying to stay clean and focused on her children. Nothing about her circumstances suggested she would soon become the center of one of Alabama's most controversial criminal cases. On the 16th of January 2018, an acquaintance named Joshua Todd Smith called her asking for help. He was stranded at a park in freezing weather. Brittany had just bought a puppy from him the day before. She agreed to help, believing it was a simple act of kindness. That decision would change everything. Brittany and her brother Chris Molly picked Todd up and brought him back to her home on Believer Street. At first, the conversation was calm. They talked about addiction recovery getting clean. But according to Brittany, the situation shifted rapidly once Chris left. Todd became violent. Brittany later testified that Todd threw her onto a bed and strangled her until she lost consciousness. When she came to, she was naked, disoriented, and lying in urine. She said Todd assaulted her repeatedly throughout the night, threatened to kill her if she told anyone, and threatened her family as well. He demanded cigarettes. He asserted control. He made it clear she was not free to leave. Terrified, Brittany called her mother and asked her to send Chris back. When he arrived, the three drove to a nearby gas station. Inside the store, Brittany did something desperate. While Todd wasn't looking, she scribbled his name on a piece of paper and slipped it to the cashier, silently pleading. If she ended up dead, this was the man responsible. She begged the cashier not to call police, afraid Todd would retaliate. They returned to the house. Chris later went back to the gas station, where the cashier confirmed what Brittany had written. Furious and protective, Chris returned home armed. Inside the house, an argument escalated into a physical fight. According to Brittany, Todd put Chris in a headlock and began choking him. Brittany screamed for them to stop. When they didn't, she grabbed the weapon from the counter and fired 3 shots. Todd collapsed. He later died at the hospital. Brittany called 911. But fear took over. On the recorded call, she initially told dispatchers that Chris had fired the shots. She later explained she was afraid police wouldn't believe her assault claims and that she needed a forensic examination immediately, the lie she hoped would buy her time. The injuries documented by medical staff were extensive. Over 30 bruises, bite marks, signs of strangulation, evidence consistent with assault. But the damage was already done. The next day, Brittany admitted she was the shooter. She was arrested and charged with murder. Her defense team prepared to argue stand your ground and Alabama law, allowing lethal force if someone reasonably believes they or others are in imminent danger. Brittany's attorneys argued she feared Todd would kill both her and her brother. They emphasized the documented injuries and the threats. But stand your ground cases are rarely successful for women. Jackson County prosecutors aggressively opposed the motion. District Attorney Jason Pierce argued Todd was the victim. He pointed to Brittany's inconsistent 911 call, her initial lie, and the lack of Todd's DNA, found on bedding, a common issue in assault cases, but one that damaged her credibility. In January 2020, Judge Jennifer Holt denied Brittany's stand your ground motion in a 19-page ruling. While acknowledging the injuries, the judge ruled Brittany had not proven she reasonably believed deadly force was necessary. The decision sent shockwaves through advocacy communities nationwide. Women's rights groups argued the case exposed deep gender disparities in how self-defense laws are applied. Data showed men, particularly white men, were far more likely to succeed with stand your ground defenses than women, especially women with histories of addiction or abuse. Brittany's trial was scheduled for February 2020. Days before jury selection, prosecutors added a second-degree arson charge related to an unrelated incident months earlier. The new charge drastically increased her sentencing exposure. Facing the possibility of decades behind bars, Brittany accepted a plea deal. On the 9th of October 2020, she pleaded guilty to murder and arson. She was sentenced to 20 years for murder and 15 years for arson. Under the agreement, she would serve 18 months in prison, followed by 18 months of house arrest, then probation. She was released in May 2021. But freedom came with strict conditions. In November 2021, Brittany violated house arrest by taking her children to a trunk or treat event. She was sent back to jail for 45 days. In September 2023, she violated probation again, this time for substance use and failing to complete a court-ordered program. She was arrested again. Her story gained national attention in a 2022 Netflix documentary, State of Alabama versus Brittany Smith, which reignited debate about whether survivors receive equal protection under self-defense laws. Today, Brittany Smith remains under correctional supervision. Supporters say she never should have been convicted. Critics argue the law was applied correctly. One man is dead, one woman insists she survived, and the line between self-defense and murder remains as blurred as ever. In the summer of 1996, the world turned its attention to Atlanta, Georgia. The Olympic Games were meant to represent unity, competition, and peace, a global celebration watched by millions. Centennial Olympic Park was filled with music, laughter, and families enjoying the warm night air. At 1:20 a.m., On July 27, that celebration became a crime scene. A security guard named Richard Jewell noticed an unattended green military-style backpack beneath a bench near the stage. Something felt wrong. He alerted authorities and began moving people away from the area. Moments later, a bomb squad confirmed his fear. The bag contained pipe bombs packed with nails and metal shrapnel designed not just to explode, but to kill. At 1:25 a.m., a calm voice called 911 from a nearby payphone. There is a bomb in Centennial Park. You have 30 minutes. 2 minutes later, at 1:27 a.m., the bomb detonated. The explosion ripped through the crowd. Alice Hawthorne, a woman visiting from Georgia with her daughter, was killed instantly. More than 100 people were injured. A news cameraman, covering the aftermath, suffered a fatal heart attack. What had been a symbol of global unity became a symbol of terror. Richard Jewell, the man who had likely saved countless lives, was initially praised as a hero. Then everything changed. Media speculation and FBI leaks painted him as a suspect. His life unraveled under relentless scrutiny. It would take months before he was cleared, and by then, the damage was permanent. Meanwhile, the real bomber vanished. Over the next 2 years, the violence continued. On the 16th of January 1997, a bomb exploded at an abortion clinic in Sandy Springs, Georgia. 1 hour later, a second bomb detonated in the parking lot, targeting first responders. 4 people were injured. The tactic was deliberate, designed to maximize casualties among those rushing to help. On the 21st of February 1997, another attack, this time at the Other Side Lounge, an Atlanta nightclub. A bomb exploded on the rear patio, injuring 5 people. A second device was discovered before it could detonate. The pattern was unmistakable. Then, on the 29th of January 1998, the violence reached Alabama. At the New Woman All-Women Healthcare Clinic in Birmingham, Nurse Emily Lyons and off-duty police officer Robert Sanderson arrived early for work. A package sat near the entrance, resembling a delivery box. As Sanderson leaned down to inspect it, the bomb detonated. Sanderson was killed instantly. Emily Lyons was thrown backward. Nails and metal fragments tore through her body. She survived, but only after 37 surgeries. Shrapnel remained embedded in her legs for years. She lost most of her vision in one eye. This time, investigators caught a break. 2 witnesses saw a man acting suspiciously and fleeing the scene. One of them followed him long enough to record a license plate number. It led to a pickup truck registered to Eric Robert Rudolph. Rudolph was 32 years old, from Murphy, North Carolina, a survivalist with extremist views. Authorities quickly connected him to the Atlanta bombings. In February 1998, he was charged in the Birmingham case. By October, he was charged in all 4 bombings. Then he disappeared. For more than 5 years, Eric Rudolph lived hidden in the rugged terrain of the Nantahala National Forest. Hundreds of FBI agents searched the mountains. Helicopters scanned the tree line. Tips poured in. Some believed he had help from sympathizers who shared his anti-abortion, anti-government ideology. Others thought he had died in the wilderness. On the 31st of May 2003 at 3 a.m., a rookie police officer in Murphy spotted a man rummaging through a dumpster behind a grocery store. The man tried to hide. The officer approached. It was Eric Rudolph. After 5 years on the run, he was captured while scavenging for food. He surrendered without resistance. Witnesses said he had tears in his eyes as he was taken into custody. Rudolph faced the death penalty. Prosecutors offered a deal, plead guilty, accept life without parole, and reveal the location of 250 pounds of hidden dynamite in the North Carolina mountains. In April 2005, Rudolph accepted. At sentencing, he showed no remorse. He described the bombings as acts of protest against abortion, against what he called global socialism, against the values represented by the Olympics. He referred to the deaths as collateral damage in a moral war. Judge Linwood Smith sentenced him to 4 consecutive life sentences without parole. Emily Lyons attended the hearing. She described the pain, the surgeries, the lifelong injuries. Rudolph stared straight ahead, expressionless. He was sent to ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison in Colorado, where he remains today. In 2024, Rudolph attempted to appeal his sentence, citing changes in federal sentencing law. The court denied his request, stating he had knowingly waived his rights in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. Eric Rudolph will die in prison. 2 people were killed. Over 100 were injured. Countless lives were changed forever. And the ideology that fueled the violence left nothing behind but suffering. But Alabama's darkest cases weren't finished yet. Because in a rural community near Mobile, another man fueled not by ideology but by drugs and rage would commit one of the most brutal family annihilations the state had ever seen. Citronelle, Alabama is a rural community about 30 miles north of Mobile. It's a place defined by distance, long, dirt roads, homes, separated by trees, and the belief that isolation offers protection. On the night of the 19th of August 2016, that belief proved dangerously false. Derek Ryan Dearman was 27 years old. He had a long criminal history in Mississippi and a reputation for violence when under the influence of drugs. His relationship with his girlfriend, Lynetta Lester, was volatile and frightening. Friends and family later described it as controlling, explosive, and unsafe. Lynetta knew she needed to leave. She fled to her brother's home on Jim Platt Road in Citronelle, seeking shelter with people she trusted. Inside the house were Joseph Adam Turner and his wife Shannon Melissa Randall. Their 3-month-old baby slept nearby. Also staying there were Shannon's brother Robert Lee Brown, 26, and her niece Chelsea Marie Reed, 22, 5 months pregnant, along with Chelsea's husband Justin Caleb Reed, 23. It was a full house, and for Lynetta, it felt like safety. That Friday night, Derek Dearman showed up looking for her. Joseph Turner told him to leave. Dearman did, but he came back. Again and again. Each time he grew more agitated. Around 1 a.m., someone inside the house called 911, reporting Dearman was on the property. Citronelle police responded, searched the area, and found nothing. Believing the threat had passed, they left. Inside the house, the family tried to sleep. They shouldn't have. Sometime after 3 a.m., Derek Dearman returned on foot. He had been using methamphetamine heavily. Later he would say the drugs made him paranoid, that they distorted reality, made him see things that weren't there. Outside the house, Dearman grabbed an axe from the yard. He forced his way inside. Joseph Turner and Shannon Randall were asleep in bed with their infant son. Dearman attacked them first, striking them repeatedly with the axe. He then moved through the house, entering another bedroom where Chelsea and Justin Reed slept. He killed them the same way. Then he found Robert Brown. 5 people were attacked in their sleep. Court records later revealed that after the initial axe attacks, Dearman retrieved firearms from inside the house and shot each victim again, ensuring none survived. The brutality was overwhelming. Investigators would later describe the scene as the worst mass killing in Mobile County history. When it was over, the house was silent. Lynetta and the baby were still alive. Dearman woke Lynetta and forced her outside. He demanded she come with him. She was terrified. He refused to leave without her. At some point he left, briefly returned with the axe, and then forced Lynetta and the 3-month-old infant into a vehicle. He drove them across state lines to his father's home in Leakesville, Mississippi, roughly 30 miles away. Along the way, he made stops, continued using drugs, and still told no one what he had done. At his father's house, the drugs began to wear off. Reality set in. Dearman broke down and confessed everything. His father urged him to turn himself in. On the 20th of August 2016, Dearman walked into the Greene County Sheriff's Office in Mississippi and surrendered. As he was transported back to Alabama, he spoke to reporters. "Drugs were making me think things that wasn't really there," he said. Back in Citronelle, concern grew when family members couldn't reach anyone in the house. By Saturday evening, someone went to check. What they found inside was almost impossible to comprehend. Police immediately issued a statewide alert warning that Dearman could be armed with knives and swords. By the time they tracked him down, he was already in custody. Mobile County prosecutors charged Dearman with 6 counts of capital murder, 5 for the victims, and 1 for Chelsea Reed's unborn child under Alabama's fetal homicide law. Dearman initially pleaded not guilty. Later, he fired his attorneys and changed his plea to guilty. Even with a guilty plea, Alabama law required the state to present evidence to a jury in a capital case. Jurors were shown crime scene photos. They heard testimony from forensic experts. They listened to the horrifying sequence of events. The jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict and recommended the death penalty. Unlike many defendants, Dearman did not fight the sentence. From prison, he gave interviews expressing remorse. He said he accepted responsibility and believed he deserved to die. In April 2024, he wrote a letter to the court asking the state to move forward with his execution. "It's not fair to the victims or their families to keep prolonging justice, he wrote. In September 2024, Alabama Governor Kay Ivey set an execution window for Derek Dearman. In his final days, he met with family members. His last meal was a seafood platter. On the 17th of October 2024, at Holman Correctional Facility, Derek Dearman was executed by lethal injection. He was pronounced dead shortly afterward. For the families left behind, emotions were complicated. Some expressed relief. Others spoke about addiction, about how drugs had destroyed someone they once knew. Some said the execution reopened wounds that never healed. 5 adults, 1 unborn child, 1 night. Citronelle would never be the same. And yet, Alabama's most disturbing cases were still unfolding, because sometimes the most calculated killings don't involve guns or axes, but syringes, medical knowledge and trust placed in the wrong hands. In Huntsville, Alabama, Marjorie Nicole Capello was known simply as Nikki. She was a registered nurse, a mother, and the wife of a respected private investigator. On the surface, her life looked stable, even admirable. She worked in healthcare, she had a family, she lived in a quiet residential neighborhood. But in September 2018, that image collapsed. On September 21, Nikki filed a missing persons report for her husband, James Jim Capello. Jim was well known in the Huntsville area, a licensed private investigator, dependable to a fault, someone who never missed work without notice. When he failed to show up, co-workers grew concerned and went to the Capello home on Lauderdale Road. Nikki refused to let them inside. Jim's car was parked in the driveway. She insisted she didn't know where he was. The behavior raised red flags, but without evidence of a crime, there was little anyone could do. The next day, Nikki made a phone call that would change everything. She called her close friend Crystal Anderson and confessed. Jim wasn't missing. He was dead. Nikki told Anderson she had killed him using insulin and she needed help getting rid of the body. Anderson was stunned. She placed the call on hold, unsure what to do. When she returned to the line, Nikki told her not to worry. She said another friend was coming to help instead. Anderson hung up and immediately called police. When Huntsville officers arrived at the Capello home, one officer went around back while another spoke with Nikki at the front door. Almost instantly, the officer detected a smell he recognized from experience, the unmistakable odor of decomposition. Nikki was detained. Behind the house, officers spotted a freshly dug grave. A shovel lay nearby. Muddy women's shoes sat next to the disturbed soil. Investigators obtained a search warrant and entered the home. Inside the garage, they found Jim Capello's body. He was wrapped in a tarp and positioned near a vehicle, his feet placed on the floorboard as if someone had been trying and failed to load him into the car. The body had been there for days. Inside the house, investigators found syringes, needles, and a bottle of insulin. Nikki was not diabetic. Detectives went to North Alabama Specialty Hospital in Athens, where Nikki worked. Hospital administrators confirmed that insulin had recently gone missing. Co-workers told investigators Nikki had spoken openly about problems in her marriage, and that she had once said the only way those problems would end was if Jim died. The picture became clearer. Jim Capello had been investigating his own wife. Family members later revealed that Jim suspected Nikki had developed a narcotics addiction after using prescription painkillers for a back injury. He believed she had been stealing drugs. He had discussed placing a tracker on her vehicle. He had searched her belongings. He was gathering evidence. He had even told his sister something chilling. If I'm found dead, she did it. At the time, no one took it seriously. Insulin, when administered to someone without diabetes, can be lethal. It causes blood sugar to drop to dangerous levels, leading to confusion, seizures, unconsciousness, and death. The injections leave little physical evidence, and once decomposition begins, insulin becomes nearly impossible to detect. Prosecutors believed Nikki used her medical knowledge to kill quietly, injecting her husband over time. When questioned, Nikki claimed she had accidentally taken insulin home from work. Investigators didn't believe her. The medical examiner could not determine an official cause of death due to decomposition. Nikki's defense team would later argue that without a confirmed medical cause, prosecutors could not prove murder. But prosecutors didn't need a cause of death. They had Nikki's confession to Crystal Anderson. They had the insulin, the syringes, the missing hospital inventory, the grave in the backyard, and the motive? Nikki wanted out of the marriage. She feared losing custody of their 4-year-old daughter if Jim's investigation into her drug use became public. Killing him solved every problem. She was arrested on the 24th of September 2018 and charged with murder. Nikki posted bond and was released the same day. In 2019, a grand jury indicted her on reckless murder, but prosecutors weren't finished. In 2021, she was re-indicted, this time for intentional murder, arguing the evidence showed planning and premeditation. Her trial began in May 2022. Over 4 days, 15 witnesses testified for the prosecution. Nikki's defense called none. Her attorney argued that insulin poisoning couldn't be proven, that decomposition erased certainty, that reasonable doubt remained. The jury deliberated for just over 30 minutes. Guilty. Nikki showed no emotion as the verdict was read. On the 14th of July 2022, she was sentenced to life in prison. Her daughter was placed in the custody of Jim's sister. Appeals followed. In March 2023, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals upheld the conviction. Another appeal was denied. Nikki Capello remains incarcerated. A nurse trained to save lives had used her knowledge to take one quietly, deliberately, and almost invisibly. And yet Alabama's darkest cases still weren't finished. Because in Auburn, a college student's ordinary night would end in abduction, murder, and a legal reckoning that would change the state forever. On the night of the 23rd of October 2019, Anaya Blanchard was doing something ordinary, the kind of small, everyday act no one ever imagines could end their life. She was 19 years old, a student at Southern Union State Community College. She had dropped her brother off at his apartment in Auburn, Alabama, just after 11 p.m. Before leaving, she sent a message to her roommate Sarah O'Brien, letting her know she was almost home. Minutes later, another message came through. Anaya said she was with a man named Eric, someone she had just met. At the time, it didn't seem alarming. Anaya was independent, confident, and cautious. But that message would be the last time anyone heard from her. By morning, she hadn't come home. Her phone went silent. Her family knew something was wrong. On October 24, Anaya was reported missing. The next day, her Honda CR-V was found 55 miles away at an apartment complex in Montgomery. The vehicle had damage along the passenger side. Inside, investigators found blood, a large amount of it. So much that forensic analysts said it indicated a life-threatening injury. This was no disappearance. Surveillance footage soon told a chilling story. Cameras at a Chevron gas station in Auburn showed Anaya inside the store around 11:20 p.m. At the same time, another man appeared on camera, Ibrahim Yazid. He was seen buying items, glancing repeatedly in Anaya's direction. More footage showed Yazid exiting the passenger side of Anaya's vehicle and then getting back in. Witnesses later reported seeing him force her into her own car before driving away. That man should never have been free. Ibrahim Yazid was 30 years old. He had an extensive and violent criminal record. Earlier in 2019, he and 3 others were accused of robbing and brutally beating 2 men at a hotel, leaving a 77-year-old victim unconscious and near death. He had been charged with kidnapping, attempted murder, and robbery. And yet, he was out on bond, nearly $300, 000, despite prior arrests that included attempting to kill police officers by ramming his car into theirs. When police released surveillance images on November 6, the public responded quickly. Tips poured in. The next day, Yazid was identified as the suspect. A warrant was issued for first-degree kidnapping. Authorities tracked him to Pensacola, Florida. When U.S. Marshals approached Yazid, fled on foot, he refused commands. Officers physically removed him from his hiding place and took him into custody. He was extradited back to Alabama and held without bond. The search for Anaya continued. On the 25th of November 2019, human remains were found in a wooded area of Macon County between Auburn and Montgomery. 2 days later, authorities confirmed what Anaya's family feared. The remains were hers. An autopsy revealed she had been killed by a gunshot wound. Her death was ruled a homicide. Court documents later revealed disturbing details. A witness told investigators they saw Yazid at a Montgomery residence wearing only shorts with a gun tucked into his waistband. The witness said Anaya's vehicle was there, but Yazid wouldn't let anyone see her. During a conversation, Yazid allegedly admitted he had shot a girl and claimed she went for the gun, suggesting she fought back. That statement destroyed any suggestion of accident. In December 2019, prosecutors upgraded Yazid's charges to capital murder. Two additional people were also charged, one for allegedly helping dispose of evidence, another for lying to police. In November 2022, a Macon County grand jury indicted Yazid on 3 counts of capital murder during a kidnapping, during a robbery, and involving a victim inside a vehicle. The Alabama Attorney General's office presented evidence for 10 days before securing the indictment. Yazid pleaded not guilty. As of now, his trial is scheduled for March 2026. If convicted, he faces either the death penalty or life without parole. But Anaya Blanchard's case did more than expose one violent man. It exposed a system failure. Public outrage grew as people learned Yazid had been free despite facing serious, violent charges. Ania's mother, Angela Harris, became a vocal advocate for change. Her stepfather, UFC fighter Walt Harris, joined her, turning grief into action. Their fight led to Ania's law. For decades, Alabama's constitution guaranteed bail to nearly all defendants except those charged with capital murder. Ania's law expanded that exception, allowing judges to deny bail for suspects accused of violent crimes like kidnapping, rape, robbery, domestic violence, and attempted murder. In November 2022, Alabama voters approved the amendment by a wide margin. It would not bring Ania back, but it might prevent another family from living the same nightmare. Anaya was 19. She had plans, dreams, a future that ended because a man who should have been in jail was walking free. Her death changed Alabama law. But even that change could not erase what came next. Because in a small town in Talladega County, another family would be torn apart, and this time, the person accused was just 16 years old. Munford, Alabama is the kind of town where people wave to each other from their front porches. A place where children walk to school and families feel insulated from the kind of violence that dominates headlines elsewhere. On the 21st of January 2020, that illusion was destroyed before dawn. At approximately 3:00 a.m., while most of Munford slept, a 16-year-old boy named Landon Durham allegedly moved through his family's home on Roy Lackey Lane with lethal intent. Inside the house were his mother, Holly Christina Durham, 36, and his 13-year-old twin brothers, Branson and Barron. By sunrise, all three would be dead. Investigators believe the attacks happened in the early morning hours. Holly was stabbed repeatedly in her bed. Branson and Barron were also stabbed multiple times as they slept. The violence was extreme, not defensive, not chaotic, but sustained. Then, according to authorities, Landon did something that stunned even veteran investigators. He went back to sleep. A few hours later, he woke up, got dressed, and went to Munford High School as if nothing had happened. He attended classes, walked the halls, sat through the school day. No teacher noticed anything out of the ordinary. No classmates raised alarms. Less than a mile away, 3 bodies lay undiscovered. Throughout the day, family members tried to reach Holly and the boys. Calls went unanswered. Text messages were ignored. By evening, concern turned into fear. A relative drove to the house to check on them. What they found inside would haunt the town for years. The relative immediately called 911. Talladega County Sheriff's deputies arrived and confirmed the worst. Holly Durham and her 2 sons were dead. The home had become a crime scene soaked in blood and unanswered questions. Investigators quickly realized something else. Landon Durham was missing. A statewide alert was issued, warning that the suspect could be armed with knives or swords. Law enforcement agencies across the region began searching. The idea that a teenager might have killed his own family and then vanished sent shockwaves through the community. The search lasted overnight. On the morning of January 22, at approximately 7:45 a.m., Cherokee County deputies spotted a vehicle traveling along County Road 71. Inside was Landon Durham. He was pulled over near a small store across from a local restaurant. He surrendered without resistance. At a press conference later that day, Talladega County District Attorney Steve Giddens confirmed what many feared. Landon Durham was charged with the murders of his mother and twin brothers. Investigators believe the killings occurred around 3:00 a.m., followed by Landon attending school before his arrest the next morning. Chief Deputy Joshua Tubbs called it one of the worst scenes he had encountered in nearly 2 decades of law enforcement. The motive was unclear. Prosecutors declined to discuss specifics publicly, though court records would later hint at family tension and possible behavioral issues. Under Alabama law, Landon was automatically charged as an adult due to the severity of the crime. He faced multiple counts of capital murder for killing more than one person in a single incident. However, because he was a minor at the time of the offense, he was not eligible for the death penalty. If convicted, the maximum sentence he could receive was life in prison without the possibility of parole. Munford was devastated. 2 days after the murders, hundreds gathered at Munford Baptist Church for a vigil. Candles flickered, prayers were whispered. Family members struggled to understand how a home that once held ordinary moments, dinners, homework, family photos, had become a site of unimaginable violence. One relative, Jennifer Harrison, asked the community to pray not only for the victims but for Landon as well, a statement that reflected the town's attempt to reconcile faith, grief, and horror. The case raised difficult questions about juvenile justice. Landon's attorneys filed motions requesting youthful offender status, a legal designation that would have sealed court records, eliminated a jury trial, and capped any sentence at 3 years in prison. Circuit Judge William Hollingsworth denied the request, citing the extreme nature of the crimes. Landon entered pleas of not guilty, and not guilty by reason of mental defect. As the case moved slowly through the court system, debates intensified. Could a 16-year-old fully comprehend the finality of killing 3 family members? Should someone so young ever face life without parole? Or did the brutality of the crime outweigh his age? Advocates for juvenile justice argued adolescent brains are still developing, that rehabilitation should always be possible. Others argued some acts are so heinous that society must prioritize protection and accountability above all else. As of now, Landon Durham remains in custody, awaiting trial. Holly Durham had been engaged to be married. She was building a future for her family. Branson and Barron were just 13 middle school boys with their whole lives ahead of them. Photos posted online show smiles, birthdays, and holidays that now feel painfully distant. The case continues to hang over Munford like a shadow. 3 people are dead, a family is gone, and a teenage boy sits in jail, accused of committing an act so cold that it defies easy explanation. But Alabama's darkest stories were not finished yet. Because in Birmingham, another case would force the state to confront a different kind of horror, not a violent act gone unnoticed, but a conviction that may have been wrong from the very beginning. On the night of the 19th of July, 1995, Birmingham, Alabama, lost one of its own. Between 1230 and 100 a.m., Jefferson County Sheriff's Deputy William Bill Hardy was working off-duty security at a local hotel. Hardy was 49 years old, a veteran law enforcement officer, a husband, a father. When gunfire erupted in the parking lot, Hardy was shot twice and the city was outraged. The murder of a deputy sheriff triggered intense pressure on investigators to find the person responsible and fast. What followed would become one of the most controversial criminal cases in Alabama history. A few hours after the shooting, around 4:00 a.m., police stopped a vehicle at a nearby motel. Inside were 4 people: 22-year-old ToForest Johnson, his paraplegic friend Ardrigus Ford, and 2 women, Latanya Henderson and Yolanda Chambers. They were detained and questioned, but police lacked evidence to make arrests. All 4 were released. At the time, the case stalled. Then came the tip. A woman named Violet Ellison contacted authorities after the state announced a $5,000 reward. She claimed her daughter was dating an inmate in the county jail and that the daughter facilitated 3-way phone calls. During one of those calls, Ellison said she overheard a man who identified himself as ToForest confess to shooting Deputy Hardy. According to her, he also claimed another man named Quentin Wilson fired a second shot. There was a problem. Ballistics evidence showed both bullets came from the same gun. There was only one shooter. Despite this contradiction, prosecutors moved forward. But even before Johnson stood trial, the state's theory began to shift. At Ardrigus Ford's trial, prosecutors argued that Ford, a man confined to a wheelchair, was the shooter. A witness, Yolanda Chambers, testified that she saw Ford shoot Deputy Hardy. Prosecutors admitted Chambers had lied in the past, but insisted she was truthful now. The jury didn't buy it. Ford's trial ended in a mistrial, with jurors voting 10-2 for acquittal. 1 month later, it was Johnson's turn. This time, prosecutors abandoned the theory that Ford was the shooter. Now they claimed Johnson fired the fatal shots. The state's case rested almost entirely on Violet Ellison's testimony about the alleged phone call. There was no physical evidence linking Johnson to the crime scene. No gun, no DNA, no fingerprints. Johnson presented more than 10 alibi witnesses who testified he was at a nightclub across town at the time of the shooting. The jury couldn't reach a unanimous verdict. Another mistrial. In 1998, prosecutors tried again with yet another version of events. Now they argued Johnson acted together with someone else. The story had changed again, but one thing remained constant: Violet Ellison. This time, the jury convicted Topher S. Johnson. He was sentenced to death. Johnson was sent to Alabama's death row. For years, he maintained his innocence. And over time, the case began to unravel. In 2015, Johnson's attorneys discovered something deeply troubling. Violet Ellison had secretly received the $5,000 reward for her testimony, a fact never disclosed to the defense or the jury. Under constitutional law, such payments must be revealed as they directly affect witness credibility. The revelation ignited outrage. Support for Johnson's innocence grew. Even Jeff Wallace, the prosecutor who had helped convict him later, publicly stated that he no longer believed the conviction was reliable and called for a new trial. Jefferson County District Attorney Danny Carr reviewed the case and agreed. He filed a brief supporting Johnson's request for a new trial, stating that the evidence had unraveled and that the foundation of the conviction had collapsed. The list of supporters expanded rapidly. Former Alabama Supreme Court justices, former governors, former attorneys general, legal scholars, civil rights organizations, the Innocence Project, religious leaders, all called for a new trial. In 2021 alone, 7 friend of the court briefs were filed, urging the court to reconsider. But the state pushed back. In June 2024, Jefferson County Circuit Judge Candace Pickett denied Johnson's request for a new trial, ruling that he had not proven prosecutorial misconduct and that procedural rules barred further appeals. Johnson's legal team filed new petitions citing the district attorney's findings as newly discovered evidence. As of late 2025, those petitions remain unresolved. Meanwhile, Johnson has spent more than 25 years on death row. He was 22 when he was arrested. He is now in his 50s. More than half his life has been spent awaiting execution for a crime many now believe he did not commit. His case was examined in the award-winning podcast Ear Witness by investigative journalist Beth Shelburne, which detailed shifting prosecution theories, unreliable testimony, and a justice system seemingly more focused on securing a conviction than finding the truth. Johnson's daughter, who advocates publicly for him, shares letters from death row messages filled with hope, fear, and exhaustion. For Deputy Hardy's family, the situation is equally painful. They deserve justice. They deserve certainty that the right person was held accountable. But justice loses meaning if the wrong man is paying the price. If Topher S. Johnson is innocent, his case represents one of the most devastating failures of Alabama's justice system. If he is guilty, then prosecutors accidentally arrived at the truth despite changing their story multiple times and relying on a witness who was secretly paid. Either way, the integrity of the system is on trial. As Alabama continues to debate Johnson's fate, one question hangs heavy over everything. Is the state prepared to admit it might have been wrong before it's too late? 10 cases, 10 different stories, different cities, different years, different faces. And yet when viewed together, they stop feeling like isolated acts of violence and begin to resemble something far more unsettling. A pattern. Alabama is not unique in experiencing crime. No place is. But what these cases reveal is how violence can emerge from every corner of society, from crowded nightclubs and quiet suburbs, from family homes and hospital garages, from ideological extremism to untreated mental illness, from addiction, fear, and systems stretched past their limits. Some of these stories are about monsters we expect to recognize. A man allegedly linked to nearly a third of a city's murders in a single year. A survivalist who turned political ideology into terror. A drug-fueled rampage that erased an entire household in minutes. These cases force us to confront the darkest extremes of human behavior, acts so violent they defy comprehension. But others are far more uncomfortable. A 14-year-old who methodically killed his entire family. A teenager who stabbed his mother and brothers, then calmly went to school the next morning. A nurse who used medical knowledge not to heal, but to quietly end a life. These cases challenge the belief that evil always announces itself, that it looks dangerous, sounds threatening, or comes from the outside. Sometimes it doesn't. And then there are the cases that don't fit cleanly into guilt or innocence. A woman who says she survived an assault, yet ended up convicted of murder. A man who has spent decades on death row, while even the prosecutor who helped convict him now questions whether justice was served. These stories force a harder question, not about crime itself, but about how we respond to it. What happens when the system designed to protect fails? Across these cases, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Violence does not exist in a vacuum. It intersects with mental health, addiction, poverty, ideology, gender, and perhaps most critically, the justice system itself. Decisions made in courtrooms, police departments, and legislative chambers ripple outward, shaping who lives, who dies, and who spends their life behind bars. Anaya Blanchard's death didn't just end a young woman's life, it changed Alabama law. But even that change came too late for her, and reform, while necessary, is always reactive. It follows tragedy. It never prevents the first one. For the families left behind, closure is rarely clean. Trials end, sentences are handed down, executions are carried out, and yet grief remains unresolved, reshaped, carried forward in quiet ways that never make headlines. For communities, the damage lingers long after the cameras leave. Trust erodes, fear settles in, and the belief that this could never happen here disappears forever. These 10 cases are not meant to shock for the sake of shock. They are meant to remind us that behind every statistic is a human life, often many of them, that justice is not automatic, that truth can be fragile, and that once violence enters a system, a family, a city, a courtroom, it rarely stays contained. Darkness does not belong to one person. It spreads when warning signs are ignored, when power goes unchecked, when the pursuit of closure outweighs the pursuit of truth, when we stop asking difficult questions because the answers are uncomfortable. And perhaps the most unsettling reality of all is this: none of these stories are truly finished. Trials are still pending, appeals are unresolved, laws continue to evolve, lives continue behind prison walls, families continue to wait for justice, for answers, for something that resembles peace. Because in the end, true crime is not just about what happened, it's about what we choose to learn from it. And whether we're willing to face the darkness not as something distant, but as something that exists wherever systems fail, silence persists, and accountability falls short. The cases are over, but the questions remain.